So, Tom Parker Bowles has just learned a very hard lesson about who really holds the power within the royal family. And frankly, the way William handled this was incredibly ruthless given the sheer audacity involved and the consequences that followed. Since Camilla entered the royal fold, Tom has carefully cultivated a public image as an entirely separate private citizen. He is the jovial food critic and pasta enthusiast who chuckles at the absurdities of royal life in interviews, consistently maintaining that his mother's marriage to the king is simply her own eccentric affair and has nothing to do with him. Yet, according to palace insiders driven by a sudden and startling surge of social ambition, Tom Parker Bowles has submitted a formal list of seating requests that threaten to upend centuries-old protocol. He is not asking for a favor, he is demanding a coronation. Grade upgrade in status. Tom's primary objective was the immediate elevation of his children, Lola and Freddie. He demanded that they be seated within the highly restrictive, sacred perimeter known as the Royal Inner Circle at Westminster Abbey. This was not a request for a decent view. It was an explicit demand that his children be positioned directly alongside Prince William and Catherine's children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. Tom's underlying logic was as aggressive as it was constitutionally flawed. He aggressively argued that because his mother, Camilla, was being anointed and crowned as queen, her blood descendants should no longer be treated as peripheral step relations or historical afterthoughts. In his view, the coronation should mark the official integration of the Parker Bowles family into the core fabric of the British monarchy. He believed that Lola and Freddie deserved to be treated as true royal grandchildren, arguing that to relegate them to the distant, non-working relatives section was a direct insult to the new queen's status. Tom looked at the shifting titles of the monarchy and concluded that his family's proximity to the crown entitled them to share in its supreme visibility on the world stage. This audacious maneuver did not just violate the rigid laws of royal etiquette, it sent an immediate shockwave of profound indignation through the quietest corridors of the House of Windsor. The reaction from the extended, blood-related members of the family who historically stay out of the spotlight was one of immediate and absolute disgust. Figures who embody the stoic, service-first tradition of the late Queen Elizabeth II, most notably Peter Phillips, the son of Princess Anne, and young James, Earl of Wessex, the son of Prince Edward, were among the first to witness and recoil from Tom's demands. These individuals have spent their entire lives understanding the exact parameters of their birthrights. They are direct, blood descendants of the sovereign, yet they have consistently and respectfully operated under the strict understanding that the spotlight belongs exclusively to the direct line of succession. To them, Tom's pushy behavior was a grotesque display of unearned entitlement. The idea that a step-family member with absolutely no constitutional duty or royal blood could bypass decades of institutional hierarchy to claim prime real estate next to the future king's children was viewed as an intolerable insult to the very concept of royal service. The tension escalated rapidly as Tom's demands reached the desk of the one man who possessed both the institutional authority and the personal motivation to crush them. Prince William, the newly minted Prince of Wales, as the direct heir to the throne and the ultimate guardian of the Windsor legacy. William viewed Tom's seating demands not as a domestic squabble over family inclusion, but as a dangerous ideological infiltration of the monarchy. William's stance was unyielding. He firmly believed that the coronation was a solemn constitutional event of the state, not a chaotic Parker Bowles family reunion designed to legitimize step-siblings and step-grandchildren. William recognized that giving in to Tom's demands would create a disastrous precedent, signaling to the world that marriage to the king could instantly elevate an entire civilian family into the inner sanctum of the royal hierarchy. The conflict between William and Tom was not merely about rows of velvet chairs. It was a fundamental battle over the definition of royal status, pitting William's uncompromising belief in blood inheritance and public duty against Tom's aggressive push for unearned domestic prominence. Part 2. The Prince of Wales draws a line. William's silent constitutional counteroffensive. The architectural design of Westminster Abbey is inherently theatrical, meant to visually communicate the precise hierarchy of the state to a global audience. Every seat, every corridor, and every inch of velvet fabric is assigned based on an intricate calculus of constitutional relevance and proximity to the throne. When Prince William discovered that Tom Parker Bowles was attempting to exploit the coronation to engineer a social coup for his own children, the Prince of Wales did not engage in loud arguments or dramatic confrontations. Instead, William utilized the absolute, bureaucratic authority of his position to execute a swift and devastating counteroffensive. To William, the suggestion that Lola and Freddie should sit alongside Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis was a direct violation of the foundational laws that keep the monarchy credible. The direct line of succession is a sacred constitutional reality, not a flexible social club where seats can be bartered or upgraded to satisfy the ego of a non-royal stepfamily. William's response to Tom's pushy agenda was characterized by a chilling, institutional precision. Without firing off a single angry warning or calling an emergency family meeting, the Prince of Wales simply took control of the seating charts and systematically dismantled every single demand Tom had submitted. William did not merely deny the request to place the Parker Bowles children in the royal inner circle. He ensured that their alternative placement was a definitive, public reminder of their exact status as civilian step-relatives. William pushed Lola and Freddie so far back into the abbey that they were effectively separated from the core royal unit by several layers of foreign dignitaries and minor European royals. By placing them in what amounted to the ecclesiastical nosebleed section, William made it visually undeniable that the coronation was an operation of the state, not a celebration of the Parker Bowles family tree. Furthermore, William extended his administrative scalpel to the official procession order. Tom had envisioned a grand, visible entrance for his family, a moment where the cameras of the world would capture the Parker Bowles clan walking in close proximity to the senior working royals, subtly signaling their integration into the heart of the monarchy. William utterly crushed this ambition. Under William's revised directive, the Parker Bowles family was completely stripped of any ceremonial role in the procession. They were ordered to enter Westminster Abbey through a side entrance, completely detached from the arrival of the King, the Queen, and the working members of the House of Windsor. They were forced to arrive at a significantly earlier hour, long before the main royal party made their grand entrance, ensuring that there would be absolutely no television footage or official photographs connecting Tom's family to the central, sacred imagery of the day. This swift administrative execution highlighted the deep, underlying animosity between the two men. William had long observed Tom's media persona with a degree of healthy skepticism, but this overt display of entitlement transformed that skepticism into a firm, protective stance. William understood that the survival of the modern monarchy depends entirely on maintaining a clear, unmistakable boundary between those who inherit the throne through blood and dedicate their lives to public service, and those who are merely adjacent to power through a parent's marriage. By forcing Tom's children into a distant section of the abbey and relegating his family to a secondary, unpublicized entrance, William was not just managing a seating chart. The Prince of Wales was drawing a permanent line in the sand, establishing a constitutional barrier that Tom Parker Bowles, despite all his social connections and aggressive demands, would never be permitted to cross. Part 3. The Palace Murmurs. The internal revolt of the blood royals. The reaction within the ancient stone walls of the palace to Tom Parker Bowles' social maneuvering was not merely one of polite disagreement. It was a profound, visceral revolt among the blood royals who formed the permanent foundation of the monarchy. To fully comprehend the depth of this internal fury, one must look at the specific individuals who witnessed this unprecedented overstep. While the public often focuses entirely on the most prominent faces of the House of Windsor, the true institutional weight of the family is carried by those who work diligently in the shadows, adhering strictly to the codes of birthright and duty. Among those most deeply offended by Tom's brazen demands were Peter Phillips and James, the Earl of Wessex. These individuals represent the unbroken genetic line of Co-Ner-Vung Elizabeth II, yet they have spent their entire lives operating under a code of absolute restraint. They understand that their proximity to the throne is a matter of constitutional destiny, not personal promotion, and they have never once attempted to weaponize their lineage for vulgar public display or unearned seating upgrades. When the details of Tom's aggressive demands leaked into the private apartments of the royal residences, the indignation among these blood relations was instantaneous. Peter Phillips, as the eldest grandchild of the late sovereign, had watched his own mother, Princess Anne, dedicate her entire existence to the service of the crown without ever demanding an atom of extra privilege. For Peter to witness a civilian step relation, a man who had spent his adulthood writing about food and capitalizing on his status as a regular bloke, suddenly demand that his own children be treated as if they were royal, Princes and princesses was a profound insult. James, the Earl of Wessex, though younger, had similarly been raised by Prince Edward and Sophie in an environment of strict humility, accepting his place in the wider royal hierarchy without complaint. The collective sentiment among these core family members was clear and unyielding. The inner circle of Westminster Abbey was a sacred space reserved for the direct line of constitutional inheritance, and it was absolutely not a playground for the ambitious descendants of a queen consort. This widespread anger created a powerful wall of institutional support around Prince William. The Prince of Wales was not acting alone in his determination to push Tom back. He was channeling the collective outrage of an entire dynasty that felt its core principles were being cheapened. The blood royals viewed Tom's argument that his mother's elevation to queen somehow magically transformed her grandchildren into royal dynasts as a dangerous and fundamentally flawed interpretation of the British Constitution. In the history of the British monarchy, a queen consort is a position of supported dignity, not an independent source of hereditary royalty. Her children do not become princes, her grandchildren do not become royal highnesses, and her family does not inherit a single shred of the state's mystical authority. By attempting to blur these lines, Tom was not just asking for better seats. He was attempting to rewrite the very rules of the institution to benefit his own domestic circle. The atmosphere within the family during the final weeks of coronation planning became incredibly charged. The silent solidarity between Prince William and the rest of the blood descendants formed an impenetrable barrier against any attempts at compromise. Every look exchanged in the quarters, every quiet conversation among the cousins, reinforced the absolute correctness of William's position. They all recognized that if Tom were allowed to position his children alongside Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, the visual message sent to the world would be one of total institutional surrender. It would suggest that the monarchy had become a modern blended family where status could be negotiated based on parental affection rather than constitutional law. The blood royals stood firmly behind the Prince of Wales, demanding that the ancient boundaries of the crown be upheld with absolute, unblinking finality, ensuring that the rightful heirs remained entirely distinct from those who were merely guests of the palace. As the seating chart was finalized under the unyielding direction of the Prince of Wales, a profound and heavy silence fell over the private quarters of the king and the queen consort. To truly understand the gravity of this situation, one must examine the agonizing position in which Queen Camilla suddenly found herself. For decades, Camilla had navigated the treacherous waters of public opinion and royal protocol with an almost terrifying level of patience and self-preservation. She had endured public hatred, she had slowly integrated herself into the firm, and she had ultimately secured the ultimate prize of the crown. Yet, in this critical moment, the woman who had conquered the House of Windsor found herself entirely stripped of her power. When her son, Tom Parker Bowles, presented his arrogant demands for prime seating, Camilla was abruptly confronted with the absolute limits of her authority. She was the queen consort, a title of immense dignity and historical weight, but she was not the sovereign, and she was certainly not the Prince of Wales. Sources close to the Coronation Planning Committee noted that Camilla was acutely aware of the constitutional reality that her son had so foolishly ignored. While maternal instinct might have compelled her to defend Tom and fight for her grandchildren to be seated in the inner circle, her deeply ingrained survival instincts dictated a very different course of action. Camilla knew that Prince William was acting as the legitimate enforcer of royal protocol. She knew that to challenge the Prince of Wales on a matter of state architecture would be an unmitigated disaster. Furthermore, she was reportedly deeply embarrassed by the actions of Tom. For years, Camilla had worked tirelessly to project an image of humility, constantly reassuring the public and the palace that her family had no desire to infiltrate the core of the monarchy. The sudden, naked display of ambition from Tom shattered that carefully constructed narrative, exposing a sense of entitlement that Camilla could not possibly defend without completely destroying her own standing among the senior working royals. Therefore, Camilla did the only thing a queen consort caught in such a humiliating trap could do. She capitulated entirely. She could not appeal to Prince William, for the Prince of Wales had already closed the door on any negotiation. More tellingly, she could not even turn to her husband, King Charles. The position of the king in this familial Cold War was a masterclass in passive, institutional self-preservation. King Charles adores Camilla, and he has spent his entire adult life fighting to ensure her status. But King Charles is also a monarch who understands that his reign is transitional. The future of the House of Windsor rests entirely upon the shoulders of Prince William, Princess Catherine, and their 3 children. King Charles was acutely aware of the internal revolt brewing among the blood royals. He knew that overruling his heir to satisfy the vanity of his stepson would provoke an unprecedented crisis of faith within his own family. King Charles knew that Prince William was not merely acting out of personal spite, but out of a profound duty to protect the mystical dignity of the crown. The king recognizes that the survival of the institution requires a ruthless clarity regarding who is royal and who is merely related to royalty. By stepping back and allowing the Prince of Wales to crush the ambitions of the Parker Bowles faction, King Charles solidified the line of succession. He made a definitive choice between his domestic comfort as a stepfather and his solemn duty as a monarch. The king remained entirely silent, effectively abandoning Tom to the merciless bureaucratic machinery of the Prince of Wales. This silence was the ultimate endorsement of the supreme authority of William over the future of the monarchy. It signaled to the entire royal establishment that while King Charles wore the crown, Prince William wielded the practical, administrative power to protect it. The conflict highlighted a brutal truth about the modern royal family. The right and the righteous path always belong to the blood royals who bear the burden of service. The institution will always protect its own, and it will ruthlessly discard those who attempt to claim its privileges without bearing its heavy responsibilities. In the end, Camilla had to swallow her pride and instruct her son to accept his public demotion. She had to sit upon her throne on the day of the coronation, wearing the magnificent crown of Queen Mary, knowing full well that her own grandchildren had been banished to the periphery of the abbey by the sheer force of the will of Prince William. The king and the queen consort were forced to acknowledge that their blended family dynamic ended where the Constitution began. Tom Parker Bowles sought a victory over protocol, but he instead provided Prince William with the perfect opportunity to demonstrate his absolute dominance. The Prince of Wales stood victorious, backed by the silent approval of the king, the helpless surrender of the queen, and the unwavering support of every single blood relative who understood that the integrity of the crown must always remain inviolable. Righteousness in the royal family is never determined by ambition, but by birthright, duty, and an unwavering devotion to the crown. Tom Parker Bowles lacked all 3, and thus, he lost everything he demanded. When the doors of Westminster Abbey finally opened to the world, the meticulous grand design of the Prince of Wales became a visible, inescapable reality. There was no public announcement of a feud, no press release detailing the rejection of Tom Parker Bowles, but the architecture of the Abbey on that historic day told the entire story with a cruel and devastating clarity. The world watched as the global media cameras scanned the historic crowds, but anyone searching for the Parker Bowles grandchildren within the epicenter of royal power was left entirely disappointed. Lola and Freddie were not positioned where their father had so aggressively demanded they be. They were not seated in the magnificent South Lantern, and they were certainly not sharing a row of velvet chairs with Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. Instead, they were firmly ensconced in what palace insiders privately termed the ecclesiastical nosebleed section, a distant corner of the abbey completely removed from the sacred action at the high altar. The physical distance between the direct heirs to the throne and the Parker Bowles children was immense, symbolizing a profound constitutional gulf. Prince William had engineered a seating plan that grouped Lola and Freddie behind rows of minor foreign dignitaries, obscure European aristocrats, and low-ranking diplomats who barely registered on the international stage. To the untrained eye, they simply looked like well-dressed guests attending a historic state event, but to the sharp minds of the global diplomatic corps and the royal household, their placement was a definitive public demotion. They were seated so far back from the anointed circle that they were effectively watching the crowning of their own step-grandfather on the large closed-circuit television screens erected for the general congregation. Every time the television cameras focused on the direct heirs, showcasing the future of the monarchy through William and his children, the separation became more pronounced. There was absolutely no visual confusion, no blurring of the lines, and no modern blended family aesthetic. The execution of the procession order was equally brutal in its precision. Tom Parker Bowles had dreamed of a moment where his family would be seen arriving in the wake of the senior royals, perhaps catching the overflow of public adulation and media attention. Instead, the Prince of Wales ensured that the Parker Bowles family was processed into the Abbey at an incredibly early hour, long before the arrival of the core royal party. They were escorted through a secondary side entrance, far removed from the grand Great West Door, where the king and the working royals made their magnificent entrances. This logistical isolation meant that Tom, his sister Laura, and his children were already seated in their distant rows, before the cameras of the world even began broadcasting the main arrivals. There were no photographs of them walking behind King Charles, no images of them interacting with the Wales family, and no historical record connecting them to the core majesty of the British state. The contrast between what Tom had demanded and what Prince William had delivered was nothing short of extraordinary. Tom had pushed for his children to be recognized as true royal grandchildren, arguing that his mother's new status as queen should naturally elevate her descendants into the inner sanctum of the court. Prince William, however, used the supreme authority of his position to prove that a queen consort's crown does not possess the power to alter the bloodline of the state. By the time the coronation service commenced, the triumph of the blood royals was total. The rightful heirs occupied the front row, bathed in the historic light of the Abbey, while the ambitious step-relatives were buried deep in the shadows of the congregation, left with nothing to do but smile politely for the cameras and endure the visible reality of their own institutional insignificance. The final notes of the magnificent coronation hymns eventually faded from the vaulted ceilings of Westminster Abbey, but the lasting consequences of that day's seating chart became a permanent fixture in the internal dynamics of the British monarchy. Tom Parker Bowles entered the coronation planning process, believing that his mother's elevation to the status of queen consort would provide his family with a golden ticket into the inner circle of royal prominence. Instead, he left London, having received a masterclass in institutional reality, delivered with the cold, administrative efficiency of the Prince of Wales. In the weeks and months that followed the great state event, Tom quietly retreated to the familiar world of food criticism and culinary writing, attempting to resurrect his public identity as the detached commoner who was entirely above the petty squabbles of the court. He resumed his media appearances, he wrote passionately about pasta, and he joked about his mother's strange workplace, but the damage to his carefully cultivated persona was absolute and entirely irreversible. The mask of indifference had slipped, and the entire royal establishment had seen the desperate social ambition that lay beneath it. Tom had attempted to push the boundaries of the crown, and in doing so, he had handed Prince William the perfect tactical opportunity to formalize a permanent barrier between the bloodline and the step family. The seating arrangement at Westminster Abbey was not a temporary compromise for a single day. It was a definitive blueprint for the future of the House of Windsor. By banishing Tom's children to the distant rows of the congregation and stripping them of any presence in the official procession, William established a rigid constitutional precedent that will govern the family for decades to come. When the historical records and official photographs of the coronation are studied by future generations, there will be absolutely no visual evidence to suggest that the Parker Bowles family ever held a position of importance within the core structure of the monarchy. They will appear exactly as they are. Private guests, who were permitted to watch the state ceremony from a respectful distance. Within the private confines of the palace, the victory of the blood royals was viewed as total and entirely righteous. The internal revolt that had brewed among figures like Peter Phillips and James, the Earl of Wessex, was completely resolved by the unyielding stance of Prince Wales. They had demanded that the integrity of their birthright be protected from unearned civilian infiltration, and William had delivered that protection with ruthless finality. The collective sentiment among the blood relations remained firm. The British monarchy is a sacred institution built upon the foundations of blood inheritance, public service, and constitutional duty, and it can never be transformed into a modern blended family to satisfy the personal ego of a step-relative. The right and the righteous path always belong to those who bear the true burden of the crown, and William's actions prove that the future of the dynasty remains in entirely safe, uncompromising hands. The long-term implications for Queen Camilla were equally sobering. While she continues to perform her duties alongside King Charles with absolute professionalism, she must live with the permanent knowledge that her position as queen does not extend any royal legitimacy to her own children or grandchildren. She had to witness her son's public demotion. She had to endure the quiet embarrassment of his failed ambition. And she had to accept that, in the grand hierarchy of the state, the will of Prince William will always overrule the desires of the Parker Bowles family. The silent king, by refusing to intervene on behalf of his stepson, solidified this reality, ensuring that the transition of power to the next generation of blood royals remains completely unblemished by domestic favoritism. Tom Parker Bowles learned a brutal, expensive lesson that cost him the comfortable fiction that he could have it both ways. He discovered that you cannot play the part of a casual commoner while secretly demanding the privileges of a prince. Prince William looked at that profound contradiction, resolved it with a definitive seating chart, and buried the unearned ambitions of the Parker Bowles family deep within the permanent shadows of Westminster Abbey.